Colorado. Most relevant to this conversation, I have spent some time working in the prior administration at the Department of Energy. And I then subsequently have been in and out of the public and private sector, always really focused on early stage kind of tech transfer and commercialization, as well as innovation ecosystem development for the energy sector. And I was fortunate enough this year to also help lead the Colorado chapter of Clean Energy for Biden, recently rebranded Clean Energy for America. And so very excited to be here today to talk about opportunities, challenges, and yeah, please ask as many questions as you'd like. I'm happy to chat afterwards if there's any follow-up.
Charles, go ahead.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks to the CCIA team for having me. Charles Cannon, I'm a senior associate with the Climate Intelligence Program at RMI. There, among other things, I work as a policy liaison, trying to, bring policy priorities from our team out towards the federal government. My background is in solar engineering and design, but have quickly become a master of none working at RMI.
Last but not least, Jeff Logan.
Thanks very much, Chris, and thanks to CCIA for organizing today's event. Jeff Logan, I've worked at NREL as an analyst in the policy and market space for clean energy for about 13 years. And before I came to NREL, I worked in Washington, D.C. at the Congressional Research Service, focusing on federal policy issues. And the similarities between when I joined NREL in 2008 and today are quite unique. So we look forward to this discussion and to see how clean energy policy and the market reaction to it will evolve going forward.
Thanks, Jeff. We'll jump into the questions now. So what does Build Back Better mean? And we'll stick with you, Jeff.
Well, at the highest level, Chris, I think, people are focused on the main target of net zero carbon emissions by the year 2050, combined with greater equity and social inclusion towards achieving those climate goals. And then, of course, there are many other subcategories underneath that, depending on what sector you're looking at. But I think the Biden administration really wants to make sure that each agency within the federal bureaucracy includes environmental justice as a key driving point to make sure that communities that have been ignored in the past, whether that's communities of color or low income or disability, to make sure that they're not bearing the brunt of environmental inequality. And then, there's other things too, like in the power sector, they want to try to decarbonize emissions by the year 2035, or depending on who you talk to, 2040. So I'm sure other people have different things they want to focus on. So let's hear from Charles and SJ on that.
Yeah, Charles, what does Build Back Better mean to you and your colleagues at RMI?
Yeah, so there's a lot of opportunity, but the fact of the matter is we're far from on track of reaching that net zero by 2050, or what RMI sees as necessary is a 50% reduction of emissions by 2030. Looking at infrastructure specifically, the American Society of Civil Engineers gave Colorado a C- in 2020, which is actually above the national average. We at RMI are talking about 2020 to 2030 as the decisive decade, and technology and materials have advanced enough that we don't need to compromise performance for lower embodied carbon technology. And how we rebuild the economy and our infrastructure out of the COVID-19 pandemic is going to shape our future for decades to come. And that's really what Build Back Better means to me and our team, is the opportunity presented in front of us to use the resources, the technologies, and the solutions at our fingertips to ensure that we can build towards the ambitious future of like a 1.5 degrees C aligned United States.
SJ, I know you have a background with the Biden campaign and previous administrations. What does Build Back Better mean to you?
So I think what's different this time around from my perspective is kind of twofold. One, Jeff mentioned this, but really thinking about, first of all, energy, clean energy as something that is not just one department. It's across the entire government enterprise and the entire system. And I think a key part of that is also tying in this kind of workforce component. And in my role at MIT, where I helped lead a task force on the work of the future, I saw this firsthand and kind of, you really can't do things separately. It's one big system. And I think the Biden team, especially, you see this in all their material and what they're trying to do in the recent executive orders, really trying to create a system that's connected. And it's not just about, investing millions and millions, trillions of dollars into transforming technology. It's actually a much more integrated system, and you have to look at all the different levers. The second part I think that is really important is, and this is something you saw with Obama too, but is the investment, not just that the government's going to make, the $2 trillion number that's out there right now, but the signaling and the commitment from the private sector to really also make some investments, especially in areas that are, more old school, like utilities. And, we can talk about Texas later today, but, those sectors in particular really need to evolve. And I think some of those, I hope to see some of that activation, and I think we will with the Biden team.
Thanks, SJ. So we'll stay with you for this next question, and you kind of teed this up already. What are the tools to make this happen? How does the Biden administration build back better? Yeah,
absolutely. So obviously there's, and Jeff will chime in here too, there's some levers that you can pull in as a president in any presidency. You have executive, regulatory, legislative are kind of the core ones. We've seen recently several executive orders coming out of the Biden team, 2 in January. I mean, more than several, not just 2, but we made several announcements in January. I'm sure many of you heard about rejoining the Paris Accord, canceling Keystone Pipeline, et cetera. And then the later one where he was really talking about this kind of cross-agency integration and announcing a couple other initiatives. And then I think late last week, he also made a big announcement about an executive orders around ARPA-C and ARPA-E investment. For those of you that don't know, Advanced Research Projects Agency, Energy, and then the potential newly launched Advanced Research Projects Agency, Climate, which is meant to be very much cross-agency. So I think we're seeing a ton of executive orders. It's really the main lever to pull right now. Obviously, we do have some legislative action potential with now a very slim margin with the Senate majority. But there's going to be, it's going to take a lot of effort to move the needle on that. I think the other thing we're also seeing, which is along the lines of the executive order, is some of these task forces and this kind of engagement again of different parts of the ecosystem. So again, it's not just about bringing all of these people into government, it's also activating people outside of government, because you really do need the private sector and the public sector outside of the government to be activated. So I think we're starting to see a lot of those levers. But again, yeah, right now it's mostly executive order, but I think we'll start to see some movement there. But I will pause because I'm sure Jeff has something to add here.
Yeah, Jeff, what are the tools to build back better? What's the NREL perspective on this?
Well, I think the Biden administration is really going to have to walk a very tight line on trying to get legislation through. And I think for the most part, they're going to have to use budget reconciliation to pass anything, because there's, it's, I think, very unlikely that you're going to get 60 senators to agree on anything. And there are restrictions on what can qualify under the budget reconciliation methodology, the bird rules, so to speak. And then on the administrative side, there are additional levers that they can pull underneath the Clean Air Act, for example. They could, for example, try to recreate the Clean Power Plan that had kind of gotten challenged under the previous Obama administration. But the Supreme Court will stand by, ready to challenge anything that they think is not comporting with the original or legal law that Congress passed that defines the parameters under which the Clean Air Act can be used to control pollution. One thing I'm really interested in seeing is, for example, the Biden administration may try to may try to use authority under the Clean Air Act to regulate criteria air pollutant emission, cut back on carbon emissions. And so they have some authority to, for example, control ozone or haze pollution under the Clean Air Act. And I think they can use that to also try to shut down additional coal generation. But we'll see how that unfolds. So those are just my high level thoughts.
That sounds like a dream for my lawyer colleagues, some of those policies. And Charles, last with you on this, what are the tools to build back better?
Yeah, so SJ and Jeff have both noted that, the focus is on executive action. And I think with the appointments of Gina McCarthy as the White House National Climate Advisor and John Kerry as the Special Envoy for Climate, they are starting to put together like the infrastructure in the executive branch to have those lines of communication and collaboration working, which is really exciting to see. On those, not to raise your lawyer friends' hopes too high, Chris, those larger infrastructure spending and legislative opportunities do exist still within budget reconciliation. The Biden administration has noted infrastructure as a priority, that becoming in a bill in some form in the second half of the year. What pieces of it pass certainly remains to be seen and is an open question. But when it comes to public investment in infrastructure, only 25% of it comes from the federal level. So in addition to the encouraging efforts that the Biden administration is taking, there's a lot on the table for Colorado as a state, and even for cities within Colorado to be a part of the solution.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's important for us to note that the term infrastructure right now does not and should not mean just roads and bridges. It also means transit. It also means public transportation. It means it means IT. It means the power grid. So, we think we need to rethink the word infrastructure when we have some of these discussions.
And if I could add to that briefly, RMI's report pre-election Coming Back Stronger adds natural systems into the definition of infrastructure. Certainly, all Coloradans understand the value and the vitality of natural systems. And there's efforts, at a state level, but also, at a municipal level with the expansion of parks and green space, and notably that the city of Denver is taking. The inclusion of natural systems, one, gives a little more respect to the environment that we're trying to nurture and save, and two, can also introduce greater lines of equity when we think about not just the needs, but the livelihood we try and create.
Thanks, Charles. So, SJ's got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in on Charles's point about the local piece. And I know it's a later question, but I think it's really, really important to realize the action that all of us individually can take. And so much of this is local. And yes, we hear about these buzzworthy things out of DC, but making sure we get local officials elected that represent this is so critical. And I just want to emphasize that, especially I'm from Southwest Colorado, and the election down there didn't quite go the way I wanted recently, and just how critical that is, to the point that Charles making about this kind of natural infrastructure piece, it's critical. It's not just about the presidential administration, it's about local races too. So sorry, got to make a plug.
No, absolutely. I think that's a very valid point. All change is local, and clearly cities, counties, and states are leading the policy push because of some of the, let's call them congressional restraints that Jeff mentioned. So I think that's a great segue, and we'll stick with you, SJ. Let's drill down a little deeper. What does Build Back Better and the tools to make that happen, what does that mean for Colorado Cleantech?
So I think first and foremost, sorry about that, not to overestimate the power of the stimulus. You know, Colorado will benefit from that, and it should, and it will, you know, become, you know, accessible at a local and a regional level. Whether we talk about infrastructure, the transit piece, agriculture, et cetera. So I think just like the Recovery Act, except even more so, this will be something that you will see. It's not going to be something you see tomorrow. It's going to be maybe in the next 6 months, but you know, we'll start to see the investment and the funding, and then hopefully also, like I mentioned before, with this investment, you also see other stakeholders outside of the government stepping up and making those investments and partnering with the government to do that. And I think that's really a critical piece. And then on top of that, it's even more critical that we have local and regional officials, not just your mayors, but also, you know, people, you know, the boards in your district, and all of these things matter. And, you know, not to call any, you know, call to action here, but, you know, I think we've definitely seen a surge of people stepping into positions of power that we wouldn't have expected. And so really encouraging that, and the diversity of things and inclusion of things as well. So I think that there's a huge role for local, municipal, regional parts of Colorado to play. I think especially, you know, if we touch a little bit on kind of this intersection of workforce and, you know, clean energy in this kind of, you know, Venn diagram of sorts. And I think that Colorado is also incredibly well positioned to take advantage of companies, and you know, with recent move to online, you know, we're seeing this huge flux of companies from either coast, and the remote nature of work, and being able to also take advantage of that, and especially as it relates to clean energy, and how do we position Colorado as a place that clean energy companies want to come and stay and be and flourish, I think is also a really critical piece. And that's very much, you know, that's not necessarily, you know, Colorado Energy Office, that's the economic development arms and all of those parts of the equation. And so again, I think it is really the systems level thinking that's really important, and it starts local and it goes to the state, and then it, you know, obviously it goes national. But I think really thinking about it at that level, and also what we as individuals can do, and I think that's a key piece. Like, what can you do tomorrow? And asking yourself that. And I know I ask myself that a lot. I don't always have an answer, but I think that's a key piece. So that's kind of my thoughts, at least on kind of how to activate and what happens in Colorado.
Thanks, SJ. And just a friendly reminder for everyone on the call, if you have a question for the panel, please put it in the chat box, and we'll try to get it here on the back end. I'd like to put a little finer point on this for you, Jeff. I know the last Recovery Act, NREL got significant funding to expand its facilities, expand its research, public-private partnerships, et cetera. What do you see with potential stimulus with Build Back Better in terms of NREL's mission?
That's a great question, Chris. And I think it's going to be difficult to say because you've got competing things going on. On one hand, I think Congress will continue to support clean energy funding, R&D, and deployment activities. But on the other hand, I believe that the minority in the Congress now is going to make fiscal stimulus or fiscal constraints their number one driving issue. And so they're going to try to cut back on all federal spending to the extent that they can. But I think in general, we're pretty confident at NREL that our budgets will certainly not fall, and that that a lot of the funding under the ARA or under any new legislation that comes out is, set up to promote innovation and continued advancement of technologies in the clean energy space.
Charles, you're on deck here. So what does Buildback Better mean for Colorado Cleantech and our entrepreneurs here in the state?
Yeah, so, as SJ said, the opportunity is likely coming. The exact timing and size of that opportunity remains to be seen. But what it means for Colorado Cleantech is that this is the opportunity to get your ducks in a row, essentially, to really dial in your value proposition, not just in economic terms, but from social benefit and understanding like how your clean tech can help to build back better. Because a lot of the focus of the climate intelligence program at RMI is recognizing that a lot of these environmental social governance metrics are kind of estimated, added back in the back end. We're really trying to work to ensure that, as materials move through supply chains, as information moves through the state, it can be like at your fingertips, tangible and real at most times to help drive decisions. So recognizing that, in absence of a Colorado Buy Clean bill, when federal money comes in for Colorado Cleantech or state money, builds to support it, your value proposition is going to be really need to be dialed so that you can articulate the benefits, because you will be up against the business as usual that is taking a shorter term view. And there's where clean tech is certainly competitive on the short term, but where it really starts to show dividends is at the medium and long term. That's really necessary for building back better.
Charles, explain to me Buy Clean bill. What do you mean by that?
Sure. So the Colorado Buy Clean bill that was proposed last year sets a maximum threshold of global warming potential for a number of building materials: structural steel, cement, and concrete. So that when you submit a bid for a public project, you need to show, usually on most other bills in different states, through environmental product declarations, that the materials you'll build the project with are below that threshold. Now, I do want to note that New York State has an interesting bill. I'm trying to see find the acronyms in my notes, but I can't find. Oh, there it is. The Low Embodied Carbon Concrete Leadership Act. That actually takes a different spin on Buy Clean, and rather than setting like a backstop, like a maximum global warming potential you can submit bids on, it actually takes you submit your bid to the project and you include the global warming potential, and the lowest global warming potential project in the bid receives a 5% discount, like in financial consideration, which I think is really interesting and kind of takes a different tact. Instead of like setting a backstop, encourages this kind of race to the bottom that might have longevity, or at least be a little more robust, rather than having to update the Buy Clean minimums every few years, which encounters legislative hurdles when you need to update them.
Chris, just one other thing. I mean, there is some funding already on the street. I mentioned this earlier, but this is more for kind of energy, kind of hard tech, tough tech companies. But RPE, as was announced last week, they do have 100 million that they'll be putting towards low carbon energy projects. And that's, I'm not sure if the FOA is open yet, but if you're talking about like actionable things, if there's energy entrepreneurs in Colorado that qualify, I mean, that's something you could look into ASAP. I forgot to mention. Yeah,
thanks, SJ. I know, Charles, that bill, it died last year because of the state legislature here took about a 10-week break when COVID really hit. When they came back, things with a fiscal note, things that weren't COVID related kind of went by the wayside. I do believe Senator Hansen is going to bring that bill back this year. I haven't seen it yet, but I anticipate that. So I want to pivot to kind of current events. Everyone that's reading the news or scrolling through their phone sees what's going on in Texas, the failure of their power grid. Obviously, they have their own grid. They're unique, called ERCOT. I think there's a lot to discuss here. I think probably a lot of us are getting questions from people that know we all play around in the clean energy policy world. So I want to open it up to the panel to talk a little bit about what your thoughts are in Texas. How do you firm up that grid? How do you prevent outages like that? Is it microgrids? Is it a little bit of tweaking your technology with wind, et cetera? So I want to kind of just jump on this current event, and we'll start with you, Jeff.
Thanks, Chris. I think we'd all probably agree that what's happening in Texas right now is unprecedented. And over the winter, ERCOT did some extreme scenarios for electricity demand and for supply availability, so far beyond even what their extreme projections were that it's just remarkable. And I think this all boils down to the fact that we need to rethink our entire approach to planning for energy systems due to climate change. And it doesn't matter if Texas had a capacity market instead of an energy only market, this still would have happened. We just need to really reconsider everything. And just to quickly summarize, we won't know the real details until after this emergency is over. But all technologies within the energy system in Texas have been impacted by this, and probably none more so than the natural gas system. Not only has the supply of natural gas been impacted due to freeze-ins, but the generation of natural gas also has been impacted. Coal, nuclear, wind, every source of energy generation in Texas has been impacted. And it's very unfortunate that people are dying over this, but I think it's the wave of things to come, unfortunately.
Charles, give us kind of the RMI perspective on what's going on there. And also I want to throw a little wrinkle into the question. You know, there's an old saying, you know, never let a crisis go to waste. You know, how can we turn what's happening in Texas into a positive here in the future?
Yeah, so, I'd say that, this is what's happening in Texas is a continuation of a pattern of, in part that we've seen with, California ISO and like electricity utilities being like overwhelmed by, changing natural conditions that they weren't prepared for. And, as Jeff said, this is wholly unprecedented. But it is really calling for, a redefinition of what resiliency means as climate change continues to accelerate. The error bars get wider of like what is possible and what the natural system can bring about. Is certainly in every crisis opportunity there. And I think this will be an opportunity to increase the resiliency of ERCOT and recognize some of the real pain points that come up in looking back after the crisis is cleared and understanding where upgrades or like diversification of technology could really serve to support Texas and indeed grids across the United States that will continue to experience really intense weather events over the coming decades.
SJ, do you think what's going on in Texas could light a fire under microgrids and the technology that all goes into that? I know that's a hot area for Colorado Cleantech.
So I think three things. One, I think this is going to light a fire under utilities in general. That's a fire. Nope, I don't mean to. It will light it'll be a catalyst, like you said, a potential kind of, way for utilities, especially the one in Texas, to, I think innovate, evolve, whatever the buzzword you want to use. I mean, if you look at even some of the, grids out there, like, utilities out there like National Grid and their innovation and venture arm and the investments they're making to become a utility of the future. Even PG&E, some of the things they've tried to be, like one of the challenges with the utility sector is there's no competition, right? And like, how do almost all other sectors, you have competition, and unfortunately people's lives get lost because we don't innovate and we're not thinking ahead and we're not planning. And the one thing I would argue is my understanding, I know this is kind of an unprecedented event, but my understanding is that something like this happened very similarly exactly a decade ago in Texas. And what did we learn from that? And so I would, I'm no expert in what happened, but I would go back to that and what changed after that point. Like, did the utility change anything? What evolved, for that piece? And then I think the second part, yes, microgrids, I think absolutely have a role to play. And hopefully this will, ease up some of the, challenges perhaps that have existed for microgrids and kind of paving the way for that. And thirdly, I would say this is a real opportunity for entrepreneurs and startups. So we need to weatherize the heck out of a bunch of homes in Texas. And there are a ton of companies that are doing that, whether you look in New York, across the country. And so really seeing this as an opportunity, I'm not saying to make money, but I mean to actually move the needle because everyone's listening. And I think seeing that firsthand, and it's so sad that these people's lives have been lost. But hopefully there's some real momentum from both public and private sector leaders in the region to say, okay, we need to weatherize the homes in our region, and we're going to do that. We're going to create incentives to do that. And I think that those kind of things I hope to see come out of this.
So quick question for you, SJ, on microgrids, to your point, we obviously, the electric grid is not a free market, right? Yeah. There are monopolies of varying sizes all over the country. Some in the utility space see microgrids as eating at their autonomy and their profits. Obviously, some utilities are for profit. So how do we promote microgrids and sort of break that monopoly mindset?
Yeah, I think it's a really tough question. I mean, in this case specifically, what I would try to do is to look at utilities who have developed, a healthy understanding and respect for them, but also look at regions that have done it well and try to figure out what we can learn from them. And in the Texas case, like, is there a way to do this that doesn't, completely disrupt the current, setup, but is, adding value? And again, this is why I go back to also these kind of innovation and kind of venture arms and how, ultimately utilities know this is coming. The smartest ones are thinking about it, and they're thinking about how they take advantage of it too. And so whether, you want to look at what National Grid's doing or others, I think that's what I would try to do, is try to pull out kind of best practices, what's going on. And then also, looking at even like, some of the solutions here in Colorado and how they might apply to Texas. Obviously it's slightly different, weather and climate, but also looking at maybe other relevant, areas or geographies that could play into it. But ultimately, I think that the Department of Energy has a big role to play, just to go back to policy and also leadership of the Biden administration in championing this. So really driving this conversation and not just saying, hey, this needs to happen, but getting people in a room to figure out how to make it happen. And I think that's one of the powers of government, is not just convening, but also helping drive action. And so I would hope, that Biden and Gina and that team use this as an opportunity to really move that not just the conversation, but the action around it, and not just leave it up to the startups and the microgrid solutions out there to figure it out and kind of move the needle more in a grassroots way, that it does come a little bit from a top down. But I don't know. I mean, Jeff, I don't know if you have a perspective here on what really what the government could really do here to really move it. I don't know, from NREL's perspective, kind of what you think.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a lot to add to what you just said, SJ, but I agree with it all. One thing I think we need to sort of wrap our heads around is that if the Build Back Better initiative works, we're going to need to think a lot more about investing in lower income areas that traditionally wouldn't be the first source of, say, microgrid investment or eventually hydrogen investments. And I think I've read that they admit the Biden administration wants 40% of any green infrastructure spending to go to communities that wouldn't have received that in the past. And what does this mean for our business models and how we think about penciling out whether a project is worth investing in or not? I think it's going to be a significant change, and we have to begin to wrap our heads around how to do that.
Thanks for that insight. Let's jump to some questions in the chat box. This is from our friend Maury Doby at the Colorado Collaboratory. Can the panel dive deeper into specific strategies and tasks that we can do as a group of different organizations to collaboratively enhance our efforts related to diversity, equity, inclusion in regard to clean energy workforce, both educational and career pathways? Charles, any thoughts on workforce and inclusion?
Yeah, I'm happy to start here. RMI is committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that, that process, I would say, is inherently uncomfortable, like in reconciling with the world that we're in that is, predominantly centered around white privilege. Like unpacking that and dealing with that discomfort is an essential part. So creating space like within your teams to hold that discomfort and process it is going to be really important. If you're doing things about diversity, equity, and inclusion and it's all comfortable, I would say you probably could be doing a bit more. More concretely, I can share a few things that RMI has done. Specifically, we've signed on to the Equal by 30 initiative, which is a public commitment by public and private sector organizations to work towards equal pay, equal leadership, and equal opportunities for women in the clean energy sector by 2030. We've recently hired a director of diversity recruiting and are trying to expand our recruiting processes to historic Black universities, and also working within the Institute to offer more trainings and to integrate DEI into considerations and conversations that are happening across the Institute.
Jeff, I know NREL is a huge employer of the state and nationally recruiting. So talk about some of the workforce issues and some of the talent that NREL tries to acquire. And how do we get more talented people involved in clean tech and R&D and entrepreneurialism, et cetera?
Good question, Chris. When I joined NREL back in 2008, we had, 1,200 people. And now here in 2021, we're getting close to 3,000. So NREL has grown quite a bit. And we recently created a diversity and inclusion component in our executive leadership at NREL. And we are, like, I really agree with what Charles said. A lot of times it's uncomfortable for people who have been part of the white privilege class to rethink their strategies and perspectives in how to have a diverse and inclusive workforce. It's not easy, but I'm really happy to see that NREL, among many other organizations, is trying to tackle or trying to address this in a way that's fundamentally different from the past. I believe that, as we mentioned earlier, focusing on environmental justice in each one of the agencies at the federal level, the Department of Energy has already taken big steps to try to change the way that they're thinking about inclusion and diversity. And I think that developing workforces in the future, they're going to throw some money at that, not only to help universities like University of Colorado Boulder, for example, to have a more inclusive workspace, but they're also going to create opportunities for organizations like NREL to make sure that they can practice what they preach and walk the talk, so to speak.
SJ, any thoughts on workforce?
Yeah, so a few. I think one, what we'll see with the stimulus is that that money going out, I am sure, will be tied to whether you're building a road, like you were talking about, more traditional infrastructure, to, you know, public transportation systems, to grid, to whatever ends up being funded through the stimulus. It will be tied to hiring an inclusive and diverse workforce. Obviously, it's not as easy as just saying, okay, hire these people. Who are these people, right? And how do you train them? So I think a key part of this is, you know, what are the types of credentialing and trades programs and internships and different mechanisms to skill folks, right? Because people, it's not that people don't want to be part of this. I think when there's jobs and there's good jobs and they're good paying jobs, people want them, but it's a question of how do we help skill, you know, skill folks that want these jobs and need these jobs. And I think that's a really tough question to answer, and who's responsible for that. I think Jeff, at a federal level, Jeff raises a good point. Like, it needs to be all the agencies. It can't just be Department of Labor pushing, you know, stuff around Pell Grants and stuff. Like, it needs to be something every agency is taking into consideration, and how they write their FOAs, how they write their RFPs, and making sure that that is integrated into every single thing. Because to me, I think where it really falls short is the intent is there, but it's like, how do we actually drive the change that's needed to actually help these folks get the skills to do this work? And this is not necessarily like, when we say skills, this is not somebody developing a solar panel. This is somebody, maybe they're a maintenance person that comes in to check the solar panel, or they're building out the public, you know, driving the public transportation vehicle, right? That's the clean energy workforce. And that's, I think, also part of it is we have to kind of change that mentality. And I think here in Colorado, specifically, I would like to see more. I think the governor has a future of work office, but he should have a somebody who's running, I don't know, within that, like the clean energy workforce czar or something like that, right? Like, it should really be, I think we should see more of this at a state level and at a local level. And I think, to get to Mara's question about like, what can the collaboratory do, or what can other organizations do, even like CCIA, it's about folding it into your mission. So, in, you know, obviously when we talk about clean energy and you know, even CCIA's role, like, okay, yes, we are targeting startups and these amazing technologies and bringing people together, but if we really want to affect change, it really needs to be threaded into all of our missions. And so maybe you can't spend thousands or millions of dollars on it, but having it be kind of core part of what you're doing and bringing people together to address that, whether it be community colleges or training programs, or, you know, guild education is based here. Like, there's so much of it, and it's just, we see education and skills as like a different industry, but it has to be part of clean energy. So that's I'll stop there. I could go on for ages, but I think it's about integrating it into what we're doing and actually making it part of how we're holding ourselves accountable as organizations and collaborations like the collaboratory.
Well, Maury, thank you for the question. And I think, unfortunately, there's no silver bullet to workforce issues, particularly with inclusion. I know that CCIA, we've kind of beat our heads against the wall with a lot of different groups, with community colleges, with apprenticeship programs, with state agencies, with state regulators on workforce issues, how to develop the workforce of the present and the future. And that's blue collar, that's white collar, that's everything in between. And, you know, I've yet to see a program or a policy really hit this and hit it comprehensively. Unfortunately, I think at the state level, and obviously there'll be some trickle down with the federal, with different federal action, is it's going to probably be a series of small to moderate type programs or initiatives, because we are so siloed, especially when you start to plug in the different types of higher ed and advanced training, you know, post high school training. So great question. I want to pivot to hydrogen. We've got several questions on hydrogen. Colorado is becoming a hydrogen hub, other than the coasts and Europe, for example. So our friend Mahesh Albuquerque, he's with the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment. and he's very passionate about hydrogen policy, has a question. Is there an opportunity for hydrogen as backup power or an off-grid solution for utilities? Charles, any thoughts on hydrogen?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm gonna throw this in the chat. I just have to plug my colleague Patrick Malloy, who works on the Breakthrough Technologies team at RMI and has a podcast called Everything About Hydrogen. So I will, I'll post that in chat, and you should go listen to that. I'll just say briefly that, you know, hydrogen does definitely present a lot of opportunities. You know, RMI has been doing research about, you know, blue hydrogen or hydrogen produced by the grid, and how, like, in some cases that can be, like today, be a lower carbon intensive fuel compared to the grid average. Although there's an incredible opportunity for green hydrogen, you know, alongside microgrids, as we see higher levels of more renewable penetration, you know, days of excess electricity, to produce green hydrogen, you know, blending with the natural gas infrastructure that we already have in place. There's really, really tremendous opportunities around hydrogen, and I'm encouraged by, like, the action the federal government is taking, and think that you know, through these ARPA funds and otherwise, you know, we should hopefully see hydrogen be a big part of the decisive decade.
So Jeff, I know NREL has done quite a bit of hydrogen research. I know you have one of the only hydrogen transportation fuel pumps in the state. Jeff, any thoughts from the NREL perspective on hydrogen?
Yeah, I can say a few words about that, Chris. I'm certainly not the spokesperson for hydrogen from NREL, but we recently created a new, what we call a critical objective at NREL that's called electrons to molecules. And this is an effort to develop, I guess, zero carbon fuels that will be critical to decarbonizing parts of our economy, which are traditionally labeled hard to decarbonize. So in this vision of a future where we have a lot of very low cost, clean electricity, you can use that to take a stream of carbon dioxide, for example, a waste gas, and rip off one of the oxygen atoms from that molecule, and then create synthetic fuels so that you can have, you know, you can convert waste streams of carbon dioxide into a zero carbon fuel that can then be used for long distance transport, for example, or freight, or certain industrial processes. And critical to achieving the goals of electrons to molecules is to have also a source of low cost hydrogen. And to do that, of course, you need to dramatically lower the cost of electrolyzers if what you want to do is make green hydrogen from water, splitting water into hydrogen, basically. And we've got a long way to go to bring those costs down. And I think there's some hope that we will make electrolyzers cheap in the same way that China made PV panels cheap, by just bringing it to massive scale on an industrial manufacturing level. So that's what's going to be needed to, I think, make hydrogen an available and suitable source of backing up our power generation, for example, with a more long-term set of storage options besides, you know, lithium-ion batteries, which are not really going to be suitable for long-term storage in the long run.
So we've got just a few minutes left. I kind of want to throw a curveball to the panel. Let's say we'll start with you, SJ. I'm going to give you a magic wand, okay? And you can enact any policy that you want, either federal, state level, but let's go big, let's go federal. So you can enact one policy to help us really move forward with building back better and promoting clean tech. What would that policy be?
God, that's so hard. I think I would have to say carbon tax or something along those lines. That would be amazing. I don't know if I don't think it's possible, but something, I mean, I think that would be huge. I feel like that's like the moonshot for me.
That's the holy grail. Yeah, let me know how those conversations go in the Senate.
Yeah, we'll do.
Charles, what your magic wand? What policy would you try to enact?
Yeah, I mean, SJ's put her finger on it that if we can have like a global immutable price on carbon that we can readily apply to all of our, goods and services, that like how much extra carbon goes into your iPhone or your Prius, or that'd be great. And that's what our climate intelligence program is working towards, trying to create the information streams that could ultimately support that. But given that that's taken, I'd probably say federal buy clean, just because I'd be able to send a tremendously strong demand signal through our material economy that hopefully, infrastructure spending is something that's a little more bipartisan and will happen, soon or eventually. And that if that's backstopped by buy clean, we can get our material economy to be lower carbon.
Jeff, you get one wave of your magic wand. What would it be?
Well, I will carbon tax, but to be more practical, I'm going to restrict myself to a clean power plan, or I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank on the words right now, but if the Senate could pass a clean energy standard, I think that would be an awesome thing, because right now, yes, you have lots of states and localities that are moving forward, and corporations that are moving forward with low carbon planning and low carbon investment. But you have a lot of states also that are refusing to do anything. And I'll just look at the southeast of the United States as an example. If we could pass a clean energy standard that required all states to do something, I think that would really make some progress. And it's a relatively easy thing to do, I think, for the Senate. But of course, we don't have 60 votes to pass that. Some people think that again, that this clean energy standard could be passed through the budget reconciliation process. I'm not so sure that's feasible. We'll see.
So what number would you pick? 30% by what day? 20%? What are your thoughts to get this clean energy standard concept to be impactful?
I think we would have to, of course, give states some flexibility in that, but we would require them to move forward with action. I think it would depend, every state's so different. Let's just say Washington State currently relies on hydropower for most of its electricity, whereas Kentucky is 93% coal still. So we'd have to set a standard of improvement for each state based on where they are today. And again, I'll just note the importance of getting electricity clean. If electrification is going to happen in this country, we need to have clean power to begin with. If you are replacing the fuel that goes into a vehicle with electricity that's based on almost a pure coal generation mix, you're not having a huge benefit. But if you have zero carbon electricity and you're displacing petroleum in your vehicle, now that's a big impact.
Yep, that's a double win, right, Jeff?
Yep.
So it sounds like carbon tax is kind of top of the wish list in terms of an impactful policy. But so with this, I want to wrap up. I want to send it back to Helen, who has a few announcements. I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank everyone that took some time out this morning to talk about these important issues. With that, Helen, you can take it away.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, SJ, Charles, and Jeff for this dynamic presentation today. I think we all know that while there are some challenges, there are great opportunities. Also, really quickly want to say this is just the first in our Energy Connection series for the year. And thank you to NREL and Faegre Drinker for supporting us during this. You really are Cleantech Challenge helpful with our Cleantech challenges right now, and in terms of being clean tech champions. We appreciate that. Just a couple brief announcements. I did want to let everyone know that I put in chat some information about a couple of our upcoming events. Remember, we have a meeting of the minds next week, and that is a member